There was once a little boy who believed every drawing deserved a place on the refrigerator. Every afternoon, he would rush home with crayons stuffed inside his backpack. His fingers still stained with colors from school. Some days, he drew forests where the trees were blue. Other days, he filled entire page with tiny birds, floating houses, and suns that smiled back at the world. None of it was perfect. The lines were crooked, the colors often spilled outside the edges, but none of that mattered, because every time he finished a drawing, he would run through the front door with the biggest smile on his face and ask the same question: "Can I show you something?" He wasn't looking for applause. He wasn't trying to become the best artist in the class. He simply wanted someone to see what his heart had made. And whenever one of those drawings found its way onto the refrigerator door, it felt like the whole world had quietly whispered, "I'm proud of you." Back then, success was simple. It wasn't a title, it wasn't money, it wasn't being admired by strangers. Success was a magnet holding a drawing on an old refrigerator. Success was hearing, "I love what you made." Success was believing that who you are was already enough. But childhood was quietly a way of changing. Not all at once, not through one dramatic moment. Sometimes it changed one sentence at a time. One afternoon, the little boy came home carrying what he believed what was his best drawing yet. He had spent hours on it, carefully coloring every corner, erasing tiny mistakes, adding details no one had asked for. He imagined exactly where it would hang. Right next to yesterday's drawing, he opened the front door, held the paper tightly, and smiled. "Look what I made." Someone glanced at it, smiled politely, then said, "That's nice." A short silence followed, then another sentence. "But remember, drawing will build your future." No one meant to hurt him. It wasn't said with anger. It wasn't meant to break his heart. It was simply advice, practical, reasonable, the kind of advice many children hear. Focus on something more important. Do something that will make you successful. You need to stand out if you want a good life. The drawing never made it onto the refrigerator, and although the little boy couldn't explain why, something inside him became quieter that day. Not his imagination, not yet, just his confidence in it. Weeks passed, then months. His drawings became less frequent. Eventually, they stopped altogether. Life became filled with exams, grades, achievements, certificates. New goals replaced old joys. Without realizing it, he slowly learned a different definition of success. Success wasn't doing what made your heart feel alive. Success became earning approval, being impressive, being productive, being someone people could point at and say, "You made it." Years passed, the crayon disappeared, the refrigerator was replaced, the drawings were forgotten, but one thing quietly remained, a question that followed him into adulthood. Am I enough if I'm not exceptional? And perhaps that question doesn't belong only to him. Maybe it belongs to millions of us, because somewhere along the way, many of us stopped asking, "What makes me come alive?" and started asking, "What will make people admire me?" Maybe that's where the race began, not the race toward success, the race toward becoming someone that we thought we had to be. to finally deserve our own place in the world. So, before we talk about success, before we talk about ambition or achievement, there's a much more important question waiting for us. Who taught us that being ordinary was something to be afraid of? And that's where our story truly begins. The little boy grew up. As most children do, his backpack became a briefcase. Crayons became laptops, report cards became performance reviews. But something else grew with him, a quiet belief that had never really been questioned. If I'm not achieving something, then who am I? He wasn't alone. Most of us never wake up on morning and decide to chase success. We're gently talked to, one compliment at a time, one comparison at a time, one expectation after another. As children, we hear things like, "Look how well your cousin is doing. She finished first in her class. He is already successful at your age." Sometimes those words are meant to inspire us, but our younger minds don't always understand the difference between encouragement and comparison. What we often hear instead is, "You are lovable when you perform." And without realizing it, we begin carrying that belief into adulthood. Psychologists have a name for this: conditional self-worth. It's the belief that your value depends on what you achieve, how productive you are, how admired you become, or how useful you appear to others. It's a heavy way to live because it means your peace is always waiting for your next accomplishment. You don't rest after reaching one goal. You immediately start chasing another. Not because you truly want to, but because standing still begins to feel dangerous. Almost like you feel which may disappear if you stop moving. Imagine running on a treadmill. You run harder, faster, longer. Your legs become stronger. Your breathing becomes heavier. You sweat, you sacrifice, but no matter how fast you run, you never actually arrive anywhere. For many people, success begins to feel exactly like that. Every achievement offers relief, but only for a little while. Soon, another expectation appears, another promotion, another degree, another milestone, another version of yourself you haven't become yet. The finish line quietly moves farther away, and you keep running, not because you're chasing joy, because you're afraid of falling behind. There's another reason this happens. Our brains are naturally wired to compare. Long before social media existed, comparison helped humans survive. It told us whether we belonged to the group, whether we were safe, whether we were accepted. But today, world has transformed that instinct into something much heavier. Now, within just 5 minutes of scrolling, you can see someone getting married, someone buying their dream home, someone traveling the world, someone becoming a millionaire before turning 30, someone announcing the life you've secretly wished for yourself. We rarely compare ourselves to someone ordinary Thursday. We compare ourselves to their breakthrough highlight. Then, we quietly return to our own lives, wondering why ours doesn't look the same. The little boy, now a grown man, didn't notice this happening. He thought he was simply become more responsible, more ambitious, more mature, but deep inside, he had stopped asking, "What kind of life would make me happy?" Instead, he asked, "What kind of life will finally prove that I'm enough?" They sound like similar questions, but they lead to completely different lives. One is guided by curiosity, the other by fear, and maybe that's real tragedy. Not that we work hard. Working hard isn't the problem. Dreaming isn't the problem. Ambition isn't the problem. The problem begins when our dreams stop belonging to us. When success becomes something we borrow from other people's expectations. Because once that happens, even achieving everything you've ever wanted may still leave you wondering, why don't I feel complete? And perhaps that answer has nothing to do with success itself. Perhaps it has everything to do with what we lost. While we were busy trying to become someone worth admiring. In the next part, we'll meet that little boy again. Only now, he has everything he once believed would make him happy. So why does he still feel empty? Years pass. The little boy eventually became the person everyone expected him to be. He studied hard. He graduated with good grades. He found a respectable job. He learned how to answer emails professionally, how to smile during meetings, how to shake hands with confidence. Little by little, his childhood dreams were replaced by adult responsibilities. People admired him, his parents were proud, friends congratulated him. On paper, his life looked successful. If someone had met him for the first time, they would probably say, "You've done well." And maybe they would be right, but there was something no one could see. Every morning, before opening his laptop, he would stare out the window for a few seconds. Not because he was lazy, not because he hated his life, but because there was a quiet feeling he could never explain. It felt as if he had arrived somewhere without remembering why he started the journey in the first place. One evening, while cleaning an old storage box, he found something he hadn't seen in years, a stack of drawings. The same crooked trees, the smiling sun, the tiny birds, the blue forest. For a long moment, he simply stared at them. Then, without realizing it, he smiled. Not because the drawings were beautiful, they weren't. Not because they were valuable, no one would pay for them. He smiled because, for the first time in years, he remembered someone who he had almost forgotten himself. Have you ever looked at an old photograph and suddenly remembered a version of yourself that disappeared somewhere along the way? The version that loved more easily, dreamed without asking for permission, created things simply because they brought joy, not because they were useful, not because they could become a career, not because they would impress anyone, just because they made you feel alive. Somewhere between growing up, many of us quietly abandoned that person. Not all at once, just little by little. One compromise, one expectation, one promotion, one comparison. Until one day, we wake up living a life we work incredibly hard to build and still wonder, why doesn't it feel like mine? Psychologists sometimes describe this as living according to external validation rather than internal values. In simple words, we becoming so busy chasing what looks successful that we stop asking what actually feels meaningful. These are two very different things. A meaningful life might never receive applause. A successful life might still empty. Neither is guaranteed by the other. Imagine wearing shoes that are two sizes too small. At first, you think I'll get used to it. Then months pass, years pass. Eventually, you stop noticing the pain, not because it disappeared, but because you lived with it for so long. It begins to feel normal. Many people live exactly like that. not in shoes, but in lives that don't truly fit them. They become so accustomed to carrying invisible pressure that they forgot what freedom even feels like. Maybe that's why so many people secretly dream about disappearing for a while. Not to escape life, but to hear their own voice again. The voice that become quieter beneath expectation, beneath achievements, beneath comparison, beneath the endless pressure to become someone extraordinary. The little boy looked at his old drawing for one last time. Then he whispered something that surprised even himself. I miss you. He wasn't talking to the drawing, he was talking to the child who once believed that being loved had nothing to do with being impressive. And maybe that child still exists inside all of us, waiting patiently for us to remember. But remembering who you are is only the first step. The harder question is, what do you do after you remember? And that's where our journey continues. A few days after finding the old drawings, he bought a small sketchbook. Not because he wanted to become an artist, not because he planned to quit his job, not because he dreamed of making money from it. He bought it simply because something inside him had been asking for it. For years, the first page stayed blank. Not for a day, not for a week, almost a month. Every evening, he would open the sketchbook, hold a pencil, and then quietly close it again. It wasn't because he had forgotten how to draw. It was because he had forgotten how to create without judging himself. As children, we create with curiosity. As adults, we create with expectations. Is this good enough? Will people like it? What if I'm not talented anymore? What's the point if no one sees it? Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, curiosity slowly becomes performance, and performance can be exhausting. One evening, instead of trying to make something beautiful, he simply drew a crooked little bird. The wings weren't symmetrical, the proportions were strange, the lines shook. He looked at it and laughed, not because it was impressive, but because, for the first time in years, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. Maybe that's something many of us have forgotten. Not everything meaningful has to become something successful. A walk doesn't have to become a fitness goal. Reading doesn't have to become productivity. Cooking doesn't have to become content. Drawing doesn't have to become a career. Sometimes, the most healing things in life are the things that exist for non-audience at all. The world often asks, what do you do? But almost never asks, what makes you feel alive? Those are very different questions. One measures your occupations, the other reveals your soul. Perhaps we've spent so much time building resumes that we've forgotten how to build a life. A resume tells people what you've accomplished. A meaningful life tells you who you've become. And maybe those aren't always the same story. So let me ask you something. Not as a challenge, not as a test, just as a quiet conversation. If nobody could applaud you, if nobody could post about your achievements, if nobody could tell you that you were successful, what would you still wake up excited to do? Take your time. Don't answer too quickly. Sometimes, the quietest answers are the most honest ones. Because beneath all the expectations, beneath all the comparisons, beneath every version of yourself you've been trying to become, there is still someone waiting. Not a better version of you, just the real one. The little boy never stopped loving to draw. He simply stopped believing that it was enough. Maybe that's what happens to many dreams. They don't disappear, they wait patiently for us to stop measuring them by the world's standards. And perhaps the greatest freedom you'll ever experience is the day you stop asking, "Is this impressive?" and start asking, "Does this feel true?" Because that simple question has the power to change an entire life. And the final part of our journey will discover something surprising. Maybe an ordinary life was never ordinary at all. Several weeks passed, the sketchbook slowly began to fill. Not with masterpiece, not with perfect illustrations, just small moments. A tree he saw during a morning walk, an old cafe on a rainy afternoon, a bird resting on a windowsill, a cup of tea that had grown cold while he was drawing. Nothing extraordinary. And somehow, that was exactly what made them beautiful. For the first time in many years, he wasn't creating to prove anything. He wasn't creating to be admired. He wasn't creating because someone expected him to. He was creating because it reminded him what it felt like to be alive. One Sunday morning, he opened the old storage box again. The childhood drawings were still there. The paper had faded. The corners were folded. Some colors had almost disappeared. But one thing hadn't changed. A little signature at the bottom of every page. His name, written with the confidence of a child who had never questioned whether he was enough. He smiled, not because he wished he could become that little boy again, but because he realized that little boy had never truly left. He had simply been buried beneath years of expectations, beneath deadlines, achievements, comparisons, fear, and the endless pressure to become someone extraordinary. Maybe that's what growing up really is, not becoming a completely different person, but slowly remembering the parts of yourself that the world convinces you to forget. Maybe maturity isn't about adding more titles to your name. Maybe it's about removing that belief that thought you were dependent on those titles. The world will always move fast. There will always be someone younger, someone richer, someone, someone more talented, someone with more followers, someone reaching milestones before you. If your pace depends on outrunning them, you'll spend your whole life running. But if your peace comes from knowing who you are, then no comparison can steal it. Because your life was never meant to be a competition. It was meant to be a journey only you can walk. Perhaps being ordinary isn't something to escape. Think about the people you remember most. The grandmother who always waited for you with warm food, the teacher who believed in you when nobody else did, the neighbor who greeted everyone with kindness, the friend who quietly stayed during your hardest day. Most of them were never famous. Most of them were never extraordinary by the world's standards. Yet somehow, they changed life. Not through greatness, but through presence. Maybe we've misunderstood what an extraordinary life really looks like. Maybe it isn't measured by how many people know your name. Maybe it's measured by how many people feel safe because you were there. The little boy closed the sketchbook, walked outside. The sun was beginning to set. Children were laughing somewhere in the distance. The wind gently moved through the trees. For years, He had believed happiness was waiting somewhere ahead. After one more achievement, one more promotion, one more milestone, but standing there, watching an ordinary sunset, he quietly realized something. Perhaps this had been the destination all along. Not success, not recognition, but becoming someone bigger. Yes, learning how to be fully present in a life that had been waiting for him all this time. So, if you've been chasing a version of yourself that always seems one step ahead, maybe today you can stop running, take a deep breath, look around, call someone you love, create something only you will ever see. Spend time doing something that doesn't make you more impressive, but makes you more alive. Because one day, when you look back on your life, you probably won't remember every promotion, or every achievement, or every number attached to your name. You'll remember the quiet mornings, the laughter you shared, the people you love, the moment you almost rushed past because you were too busy trying to become someone else. Maybe you were never meant to become extraordinary. Maybe you were simply meant to become yourself. And perhaps that has always been more than enough.